And, you know, when I was plotting out what I wanted to do this month with episodes, I intentionally put Sebastião Salgado in the last episode and Michael Kenna to run back to back. And, you know, I think it's an interesting pairing because for me, you know, the only commonality these two photographers have is that they both shoot black and white work and that they both kind of have this sense of fine art, but they're radically different. They're 180 degrees apart from one another other than those two things. Sebastião Salgado is this intense individual, this very leftist personality who brings this intensity to his photographs that are very reflective of his personality, and by golly, he is going to change the world with his camera lens. And I love that. I think it's beautiful. I think it's intense. I love that kind of fire that comes out of a guy like Sebastião Salgado. Michael Kenna, though, on the other side of the spectrum, couldn't be any different. I mean, he's a complete 180 from Salgado. And Michael Kenna is more of this Zen Buddhist kind of thought, minimalist compositions, very meditative in nature, and I think they really speak to something very deep down in our souls as people who enjoy this type of photography. And the reason I put these two people back to back is, for me, I think that this is when photography becomes such a beautiful thing, when you have different personalities that all kind of contribute to this oeuvre, this world that we all know as photography, and I think that that's absolutely brilliant. Michael Kenna has gone on record several times as stating that, you know, he spent a lot of time alone as a kid. He prefers to work that way these days. He likes to go out and take his time with things, you know, to shoot photography all night sometimes, you know, to wait for the right times of day and to really take it in from, you know, this very Zen school of thought. And I think I have some more to say on this, but without further ado, probably best to go look at some images. So this is the work of Michael Kenna. Michael Kenna was born in northwest England in 1953. At an early age, he found interest in his surroundings, spending time alone, as he says, living in his imagination at the park, railway station, and the church. In his early years, he expressed an interest in becoming a priest. He attended a Catholic seminary boarding school before going on to the Banbury School of Art in Oxfordshire for a year before taking a 3-year course in photography at the London College of Printing. Kenna switched from painting to photography because he felt it was a more practical way to earn a living. After taking jobs as a commercial photographer, Kenna's interest in fine art began after seeing a Bill Brandt exhibition at the Victoria and Albert Museum in 1975 titled The Land. Brandt became a major influence on Michael's work, among others such as Harry Callahan, Charles Sheeler, and Alfred Stieglitz. In 1976, he visited the United States to try to get his work seen. The next few years proved to be difficult as he worked as an assistant and printer while developing his own style. He eventually landed a job in San Francisco printing for Ruth Bernhard, where he spent many years collaborating and perfecting his printing skills. Bernhard proved to be a valuable mentor as Kenna learned the photography business and made contacts at galleries and museums. Ruth was also a perfectionist for quality with printing, and Kenna spent over 10 years working with her, mastering the craft. In 1981, Kenna held his first solo exhibition in San Francisco. His career has evolved into a series of location-themed, large-scale series work, of which he often juggles up to 10 projects at a time. Though these projects are often marked with book releases and exhibitions, Kenna will often revisit his work as there is always more to continue. One such example was a series of prints and negatives which he donated to the state of France, documenting World War II concentration camp sites. The project took over 10 years before the donation, but Kenna states that to this day it still interests him to continue. To date, Kenna has published over 25 books and won honors and awards, including Chevalier of the Order of Arts and Letters in 2000 by the French Ministry of Culture. Kenna's work takes him on a global scale to locations including Europe, England, Japan, China, and the Easter Islands. He currently lives in Seattle, Washington. So we're going to look at some work here today, and for this example I've chosen to use my copy of the Michael Kenna, the 20-year retrospective. Now there are 2 volumes of this. This is volume 1, there is a volume 2 of this. The reason I have selected this is because I want to look at some of Kenna's earlier work, because I think it makes sense to see where he's come from, and what you're going to realize in here that for Kenna, you know, a life's body of work is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And this is a wonderful book, easy to find. It's not one of the real collectible Kenna books. But what's interesting to me here, and this is the first image that's in the book, and this is from 1975. This is Richmond, Surrey, England. And you can see that there is a little bit of a difference between the more modern work that Kenna has done, which a lot of which I showed during the biography, and some of this early work. You don't see the square format, for instance. Some of this was done 4x5. Some of it may be 35 millimeter. I'm not exactly certain on that, but I believe 4x5 and 6x6 were the 2 formats he shot the most of, 6x6 being what he's settled on in the modern day. But you can already see, you know, this a Zen minimalism kind of approach here, you know, where you have this beautiful printing technique of almost pure black at the bottom to you get kind of pure white sorta in here at the base of the trees, but it's this gradient moving up, and it's these trees in mist, and it's just a beautiful photograph. And a lot of his early work is, you know, you can see how it developed into what he's doing today. I love this one of the reeds. This is from 1977. So these were pretty early. This is around the time he came to the United States and started working for Ruth Bernhard. And by the way, Ruth Bernhard wrote the intro to this book, which is really kind of cool. She says some really nice things about Kenna. But I think looking at these early images, there's a lot of interest that you see, you know, with implied leading lines, for instance, with composition, where we have the rectangular image, the sun kind of being on the point of the rule of thirds here, but the point of interest being this row of trees here. It's not a bunch of trees, it's one row of trees, and to get that minimal with the composition and the way he shot it, the angle he chose, where you get a leading line that goes down in perspective with the top of the trees here, and you know, this kind of triangular form that shapes here. And when you can reduce the image to those geometrical shapes, a lot of times that's when, you know, a lot of the minimalist photographers, certainly Kenna included, some of the time, you know, where they start to really come into play. You know, the horizon line being in the middle of the frame here. You know, a lot of us are told early on in composition, that's not what you want to do. You don't want to do that, and here Kenna's doing it to great effect. But what makes it are these little points of interest on the horizon line. This little group of trees, the structure, and then the other tree. And then the beautiful detail in these clouds. And you can see that even early on, Kenna had a real nice, really solid eye for printing. Another one that I really love is this one, and this is from 1974. But the way the mist works with the clouds and the trees below, and you know, these kinds of images, the difficulty in shooting them is waiting for the right moment. And there's no question that Kenna is one of those photographers who has a lot of patience, is willing to wait for that moment, was willing to put the time into it to do that. He didn't just walk out and shoot that one day. That was probably plotted and waited on as far as sunset goes and all that stuff. Another interesting one, this is later, this is from 1991, and you start to see Kenna's style mature quite a bit. I love this, it's a landscape photo, but what you have down here in the foreground, it fades to black, but you have sheep here on the foreground, and then this flock of birds that's just kind of morphing its way through the composition, and it's absolutely brilliant. And again, look at the printing, look at the techniques that are included here, the way it goes to almost black down at the bottom, the way that landscape is really burned in, and then the way that you have this luminance coming through the haze and the sun, and then the birds are in the right place. So, you know, I think with Kenna, and what most people don't realize a lot of times, is that the maturity of him as a photographer extends both in the printing and the composition and what happens in camera. And I think this is where you start to see a slight homage to Ansel Adams and a lot of the photographers that became before him. And we're going to look at some of those images too, where he pays a little bit of tribute at times, which I think is wonderful. You know, he's aware of where he is in that lineage and where he is in terms of modern photography. Another beautiful one, just very simple. Landscape, this pyramid hill in the back, and a tree. To reduce it just to that, especially when you're in an exotic location, I mean, that takes a lot of patience and skill to master, and it's absolutely unbelievable. I'm going to bump up just a little bit here, and this is another one. Now, A while back, I did a video that I called Interpretations, and what I did was I picked, and I'd like to do another one of these in the coming episodes, where I pick a point of interest that multiple photographers have covered and how you immediately see the difference in their styles. And I think this embodies a lot of that, which is an image of Stonehenge in England, and how many photographers have shot Stonehenge. And it looks like Michael Kenna. It does not look like somebody else did it. You can tell it's Kenna's style. And I think this is absolutely brilliant. This is from 1990. Again, the printing technique, the time of day it's shot, the way that the eye is drawn in using light and painting with light. Again, some of this is done in camera, some of this is done, you know, in the printing techniques in the darkroom. But, you know, I'd like to do another interpretations episode because I think this kind of image is what brings that down. When you see multiple photographers shooting the same thing, but all retaining their own voice. And I think that's where photography, for me, becomes very interesting. And I think it's a great way to learn. And you can see this with a lot of, these are, I call them more recent. This is 1990 also. This is Glastonbury Tour, study number 3 in Somerset, England, and it's just the essentials. You know, I talked a little while ago about the Gestalt and the German idea in graphic design of boiling it down to only the essential elements. And this is what's really hard as a photographer, I think, is not so much what you shoot, it's what you're not shooting. And I think Kenna represents that so well. Another homage here, we're starting to see, you know, images of the Southwest. This is New Mexico, USA, obviously Stieglitz and, you know, his lady George O'Keeffe really being identified with that part of the United States. But here we have a completely different interpretation of this, and it is pure Michael Kenna. This is from 1993. What's interesting, though, is this figure of the dog running past, and that's something you don't see a lot in Kenna's imagery. And I don't know if you're going to pick this up on the video or not. It's over here, and the way that's kind of highlighted with a little bit of dodging in the print. I mean, he's definitely in the shadows, and so that was done post, but very beautiful effect and very meaningful composition technique. I'm going to bump up a little more here, and another one of my favorite images, and this is where you start to see Kenna really develop a lot of his own personality here. And I also think, in some ways, you know, and I'm not trying to compare him to Salgado at all, but this is more of a Salgado kind of approach here, where you have this frozen fountain, and this is in Detroit, Michigan, and it's a frozen fountain, so it's ice that's formed as the fountain stayed up all night or whatever it was. And, you know, just this galumphing, simplistic detail in the fact that it's just a geometric shape, but when you get into it, you see all these fine details of these plumes of water that formed into ice. And really magnificent, beautiful. Another thing I should mention too along these lines, another one that I really love from Detroit, Michigan, and just the simple cross that this makes. You know, Kenna tends to work in large-scale projects that he will take on and kind of commit himself to indefinitely. And some of these include places like China. They include places like the Easter Islands, perhaps. You know, one of the big ones he did was the concentration camp locations of the images he donated to the state of France. And he will just kind of like, again, that plays in with that Zen meditative quality to it, where he will revisit a location and stay on it and not give up and revisit it year after year after year. And it's really interesting too, because I think in Kenna's case you're going to see very minor differences, but they are differences nonetheless. And there's a whole body of work in here that we'll get into that was done, we're starting to separate it out, the Detroit stuff's later, in Michigan, showing that kind of deconstruction. And if you're familiar with the United States, you know that Detroit is a city that is in a lot of major state of disrepair. In fact, since we're talking about that, let me bump ahead, see if I can find those images. And to really take that on with a level of respect, it's at the end of the book here. Let's see if I can find it. That it deserves, and with that kind of meditative exploration to it is completely amazing. Here we get into doc images. Here it comes. So here's Dearborn, Michigan. So this is all, you know, basically Midwest United States, but this element of industry, the way, you know, again, painting with light, and the way that you see these beautiful clouds and this moisture come into the image, and you see the state of industry probably a little bit in state of decline, but a lot of the way these shapes work. And not only that, but, you know, and you see this probably, I would say, in Alvin Langdon Coburn's work, which is much earlier than Kenna, almost 100 years per se, but you know, when you see these big, dark, high contrast shapes and the way that he uses light to add a dimension and a quality to this work. So obviously the foreground is completely black, and as it starts fading to the back, these structures become lighter and lighter, and so you get this real three-dimensional quality to the print, which is simply fabulous. It's amazing. These are all from Dearborn, Michigan, and I really love these images. I think that this is one of his lesser-known sets of work, but I think it's extremely important. It really paints this picture of the industrial nature of what's going on in this part of the United States. And it's, you know, rapid decline, I think, as you see in recent years. But anyway, back on track. Another famous set of his that he's known for are these shots of Radcliffe Power Station in the UK. And this was another study. And again, it's not just going out and shooting one image. It's going out and revisiting and shooting a collection of images and experimenting with possibilities. So in some of these you see very long, possibly nighttime exposures where you have these clouds that tend to, you know, because the wind is blowing and they're moving, they tend to become very smooth and flow through the composition like that. Whereas others, as you'll see, like this one on the right, they're shorter exposure, and so that element of time and how that affects the picture, it's a shorter exposure, and so you don't have the blur and that flow to the image. In others you do, and so it's just a really interesting character study of what's possible here. This one on the left I absolutely adore. This is from 1984, and what's interesting is, you know, if you took this out of the context of the other images, it may not have the same effect because you're only seeing a partial shape here, and the way the smoke bill is out of that. And I think that reducing it down and creating a curiosity, maybe not including the whole image of what you're seeing sometimes, is just as important as something like this where you do see the whole image. And Kenna's just a master of that. These really long exposures where, you know, you start to see a really lush, smooth texture, almost organic in nature of what's going on with the images. Another one where you can actually see the stars moving. Again, long exposure via time with that, and amazing stuff. Anyway, another one of my favorites, I think, and you get that same effect here. This is other side of the world here. This is Florida, and from 1992, and you simply have an overturned chair or lawn chair on the beach, and, you know, experimenting with the beach. And again, this would make good material for the interpretation section, because the way that somebody like Michael Kenna approaches water and ocean, and it's completely different than somebody, let's say Hiroshi Sugimoto, who has a very different interpretation of what that should be. Another one of my favorites, just this little group of sticks here, and how that communicates through the image with the textures, with the clouds, with the water. Only enough information is given so that we see that that's water. We definitely have a horizon. The water is different than the sky, and then even these are mirrored. So there's a sense of symmetry, but also isolation of these elements. And it's just what makes Michael Kenna so fabulous. Another one that is very cool here too, and I bookmarked this because if you're a fan of Henri Cartier-Bresson, this pays a little homage, and actually it is entitled Homage to HCB, Brittany, France, 1993. There's a famous image that Henri Cartier-Bresson took of the same row of trees with the road going through. His composition was much different. It was a rectangular format. It extended out here, used rule of thirds and a lot of these painter composition techniques. But again, interpretations, and so how has Kenna reinterpreted this image to be his own? And that is the stamp of personality, and that's what I think so few people understand about somebody like Michael Kenna. That is what he is saying, is that he is putting his own voice into it and doing it that way. And I think that boat is severely missed a lot of times. I'm going to end it with this one. This is one of my absolute favorite images. And what I love about this is there's almost a cartoonish illustrative type quality to this image. This is another one from Paris. This is called Windy Trees. The way the focus is played with here, the wind is obviously blowing, that element of time comes in, and he has chosen a duration of shutter speed that gives you just enough motion to get a little bit of blur and a little bit of inconsistency through here and a little bit of this surrealistic quality The second thing that makes this is the composition, rectangular format, and you only see this trunk. You're not given another one. And so it kind of looks like this weird tree is extended out into what is not actually possible in real life. And I think this is just the sense of play, the sense of personality, the sense of timing is what makes Michael Kenna so absolutely amazing. Michael Kenna is one of the more important figures in modern photography, I think, for a number of reasons, but mainly because if you look at his approach to shooting landscapes, you have somebody that is very steeped in the tradition of somebody like Ansel Adams and the photographers that have come before. He still uses the darkroom, he still shoots film, and I think there is a part of his work that definitely is an homage, and it's a natural progression out of that lineage of the photographers that have come before. What's interesting about Michael Kenna, and it's very obvious in these photographs, is that he is representing this new generation of landscape photography, where there is, rather than, you know, what Ansel Adams was doing, and not to discredit Ansel at all, but Ansel's time, he was trying to go for what he referred to as straight photography, which was getting away from pictorialism and just portraying landscapes and images in the way that they were naturally and be able to replicate that on the film. And that was the aesthetic that he was going for. Michael Kenna is an extension to that, and at the same time he also is a departure somewhat from that, because what he is doing is he's looking for compositional breadth. He's looking to make a statement with these images that, you know, it almost is more of this influence from the German Bauhaus, where you know, this idea of the Gestalt, where you narrow an image down to only the essential components and what absolutely needs to be there, and anything non-essential is excluded, and they're absolutely brilliant. There's a lot that he's saying, I think, intellectually, emotionally with these photos, and I just think the world of Michael Kenna. The only thing that saddens me about Michael Kenna, and this is not Michael Kenna's fault at all, but you see a lot of people that clone his work now. And, you know, he has such a striking, interesting, minimalistic style, and I can understand why people enjoy that. I love his work and why people want to get into that, but I think there's a point where you can be influenced too far. I judged a competition last year that was online. I won't say which one it was, but and there was some very good work in there. But one thing that kind of saddened me is, like, I mean, I'm talking a lot, like a good 75–80% of the images that were entered into this competition were, I mean, they looked like it was Michael Kenna Jr. And they were brilliant photos. They were interesting. They were beautifully rendered. But the problem is that they just looked like Michael Kenna, and it was so blatantly obvious who the one photographer this individual was attaching themselves to and trying to emulate. And, you know, I think it's interesting with any art, and whether this be photography, whether this be visual art like painting, sculpture, whether it be music, anything like that, I think it's okay early on when you're younger to try to emulate your heroes. There's a lot you can learn from that. You try to get into their mind, see how they think things through, what makes them them. But there does come a point in everybody's creative life where you need to enter the second act. And by the second act, I mean that's the point where you need to figure out what it is that makes you an individual and what you have to say to get across in the image. Michael Kenna did that, and so did Sebastião Salgado, and so did Tom Burrell, and so did Hiroshi Sugimoto, and a lot of the other photographers we talked about on here. And I think at that point, that is your responsibility, is to find that voice. And it's very, very difficult to do. I don't think I've ever successfully done it. You know, a lot of photographers, sometimes it takes a lifetime. But also, again, look at Michael Kenna, because I think this is one of the exciting and I think inspiring things about Kenna, is that he had a long career of paying dues before he was ever known as a commercial, or excuse me, well, he does commercial work, but known as a fine artist. And, you know, he assisted Ruth Bernhard for over 10 years just working on printing and printing someone else's images. And it was a long road for him. And what I appreciate about that is the patience that goes into that, which is very on par with what Kenna's kind of personality tends to be. But he earned every bit of it, and it's okay. You don't want to do things too soon, and you definitely want to find your own voice and your own personality. And I think Kenna has done that with something like landscape photography, which has been very difficult, I think, in the shadow of Ansel Adams, who did things a certain way for years and years. To break out of that mold and to try to find something new and a new voice to say about it. And I think certainly that Kenna has. So anyway, once again, guys, this has been another episode of The Art of Photography. I will see you guys in the next episode. Later.